Asheville, North Carolina. What's not to love? You got food, you got beer, you got mountains. It's literally everything that you want in one place. It's great. This is a story of my trip to Asheville and the Blue Ridge Mountains as a genealogist and as someone who has family roots in that area. There were a lot of things that happened in this trip that were like divine intervention by the genealogical gods. There were just a lot of big coincidences. So the first really exciting part about this trip was stopping in Johnson City, Tennessee. And I was so excited for this because I've never been to Eastern Tennessee. And this is an area of the country that actually I could say was the beginning of my interest in genealogy, the beginning of my dad's interest in genealogy, and the beginning of my grandfather's interest in genealogy, because the brick walls that we have in this area have been passed down from my grandpa to me, and I still am working on cracking them. My Buckner family are from an area in Missouri. They're from the Ozarks, Iron County, Missouri. And before they settled in that part of Missouri, they were from Sevier County, Tennessee, Sevierville. Now the brick wall that we have is linking our Buckner family from Sevierville, Tennessee, or Sevier County, Tennessee, to the larger Buckner family of Virginia. If you're from Virginia, you probably know of the Buckner family. They were a super large, super influential early colonial family in Virginia. And when I say early, I mean really early, like mid 1600s. They were some of the first European settlers in the area. They planted tobacco. They were everywhere. So they eventually somehow went from Virginia to Tennessee and then to Missouri, where my Buckner family are from. And so the brick wall that my whole family has had is linking the Buckners in Sevier County, Tennessee to the Buckners in Virginia. But I was really interested in just at least driving through Johnson City, because Johnson City would be the closest that I would have ever gotten to Sevierville, Tennessee, where my brick wall is and has been for decades. Another really cool thing about Eastern Tennessee and that whole region is a little known historical happening called the State of Franklin. It was a state established by the settlers who had settled in that area from Virginia and from North Carolina in, I think, the 1780s maybe, and it lasted only like a few decades because the federal government was like, you can't just create a state. But the cool thing about the short-lived State of Franklin is that when my Buckner and Carr families, those were the two families that settled in that area, when they settled in Eastern Tennessee in Sevier County, the State of Franklin was what it was. It wasn't Tennessee yet. Tennessee hadn't been established. It was Franklin. They had left North Carolina and probably Virginia and settled in this area. So we arrived in Johnson City and we pulled over in a parking lot. We were looking for food, and I look up, and what is the street that we're pulled over on? The State of Franklin. I thought that was so cool. People don't know about Franklin. It's a really fascinating history. If you have family from Eastern Tennessee in that time frame, look into Franklin. Super fascinating history. So then we continue on our drive from Johnson City down to Asheville. We're on the highway and something else happens. We actually just passed a spot on, I think we're on I-26, which is the main highway between the two cities, called Buckner Gap. And apparently it is the highest point that you can reach on the highway in North Carolina. Now, the only reason I knew Buckner Gap was there and that we were gonna pass by it is because I was on Google Maps one day zooming in and around the Blue Ridge Mountain area around Asheville. We were planning on driving part of the Blue Ridge Parkway back to DC, so I was just looking for like stops to take, and I come across a little lake called Buckner Lake. And I was like, no way. The Buckners were literally everywhere. Like, there are things named Buckner whatever everywhere. So I start doing all this research and I start looking for other things named after Buckners, because if there's this one Buckner Lake, you know there's gonna be Buckner Creeks and Buckner Knobs and Buckner whatever. So that's how I found Buckner Gap. If you're trying to place your family in a certain place in a certain time, but there's no surviving records to do so, look into what the creeks are named after, what the lakes are named after, what the passes and the knobs and the mountains and the hills. They're all named after people who once settled there. So if you're having trouble placing your family in a certain place, see if there's any areas named after them. So we pass through Buckner Gap and then we get to Asheville. One of my favorite parts of this trip that was totally unexpected was the drive from Asheville to Chimney Rock State Park, which is like a big tourist attraction in that area. Because you leave Asheville, you're on the highway, and all of a sudden you're on this tiny little winding road through the valley of the mountains alongside a creek. You can feel the history on that road. It's a really old road. The houses are built right up alongside the road, almost like an old toll road. There's a place on that road called Cheryl's Inn and served as an inn for the travelers along that road. So it was at one point it was like the road to take, but it was just this gorgeous little winding road, and I felt the history. I almost felt like I should be hearing bagpipes playing off the sides of the mountains from the ghosts of all the Scottish settlers who were once there. I loved it so much, and that was so unexpected, just being in this little pocket of the world that almost seems like it's forgotten in time. Then we got to Chimney Rock State Park. So we just finished our hike in Chimney Rock State Park, which is part of Pisgah National Forest. I don't know how North Carolinians say it. But when we saw a sign for that, Yair, who speaks Hebrew, noticed something interesting.
Pisgah is actually a Hebrew word for summit. In Hebrew, you pronounce it Pisgah, which literally means summit or top of a mountain.
And I was like, no way it's named after a Hebrew word. Like, it's probably named after a word from one of the indigenous tribes that lived here. But I looked it up on Wikipedia, and it was named after Hebrew. So, fun fact. So we head back to Asheville, and we decide to spend the rest of the day in the River Arts District, which is like this really cool arts district by the river. There's a lot of art galleries, there's graffiti everywhere to look at. It's just like a really cool little area. And we're walking around and we find this coffee shop. So we get coffee, we go sit in the back of the coffee shop where they have tables in the grass, and I look over to my left and there is a guy there who's making tintypes of people. How perfect for me. Like, how on brand for me. If you don't know, I am the person behind Roam Your Roots, obviously, but I'm also the person behind another Instagram page called Forgotten Faces Project, where I collect old photos and I research them with the purpose of returning them to their family, to the descendants of the people in the photos. Like, old photos are my thing. I collect them, I love them, and here's a guy literally randomly in Asheville just taking tintypes of people. It was so cool, and how perfect for a genealogist to go on a trip to Asheville and find a guy who travels around the country and makes tintypes. His name is Joseph Wyman. I'll link him in the description below. He travels around the US in his bus, and he does tintypes of people, so keep an eye out. He may be coming to your city soon. So then we go to this really awesome taco shop, and we're sitting outside by the river that runs through the River Arts District, the big river that runs through Asheville, actually. It's called the French Broad River. And enjoying these tacos. I didn't think anything of it, and it was only until after I had gotten back home that I started thinking, like, okay, Asheville is actually really close to Sevier County, Tennessee. It's closer than I realized. I thought Johnson City was the closest I would ever get, but Asheville is right there. And I know my family came from North Carolina. My Carr family came from North Carolina to Sevier County, Tennessee. So I was reading some of the notes that other people had online. There's some history there from other descendants who had notes passed down from them about the history of the Carr family. And there was one note that said that the family traveled from North Carolina up the river and then settled in Sevier County. And I was thinking to myself, the river? what river? And I kept looking through the notes and it mentioned the French Broad River. And I looked at Google Maps and sure enough, that is the river that I was sitting at eating my tacos. This was the river that brought part of my family from North Carolina to Sevier County. I was sitting right there. My family had traveled up this river in the late 1700s. This river, undeniably, they traveled up the French Broad River to Tennessee. And I was sitting right there. And that was when everything was, it just all clicked to me. I was like, how is this possible? There are so many little coincidences where I passed by places that my family had been. Like I said, the genealogy gods were gracing me with their coincidences. So I've saved the best story for last, obviously. It also was the last thing to happen on our trip. We spent the last day in Asheville doing a little bit of the Blue Ridge Parkway. We were told that there was a peak out in the Blue Ridge Parkway not too far from Asheville called Craggy Pinnacle. That was a great place to watch the sunset. We drove there, really beautiful part of the world. It was my first time on the Blue Ridge Parkway, so that was gorgeous. And we drive and we're hiking up to Craggy Pinnacle and the sunset is just gorgeous. There are a lot of people up there. There were people taking engagement photos. It was so beautiful, and I know why they call them the Blue Ridge Mountains now, because you look out and it's just blue. But again, it wasn't until after I returned home and I was doing some research into Craggy Pinnacle, I don't know why, just looking for photos maybe, or I'm not sure. And I found an article that said that Craggy Pinnacle, this beautiful place that we had just hiked, was not always known as Craggy Pinnacle. Actually, the first name that it had was Buckners Knob. Pure divine intervention on behalf of the genealogical gods, once again. It was originally named after the Buckner family, who were one of the first families apparently to settle in this area of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And that's all I know. I haven't done any research past that. I'm not sure which line of the Buckner family. I know it wasn't mine because I don't think mine were ever in North Carolina, but you never know. So that is my trip to Asheville, full of all these strange little coincidences that it just made it the perfect trip. It wasn't supposed to be a genealogy trip, but it turned into that for me very quickly. I hope you enjoyed this story. I hope to be able to bring you more stories just like this, but to be honest, I think this is one of a kind. If you have roots in this part of the country, in Asheville, the Blue Ridge Mountains, if you have any Buckners or Carrs in your family, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you're a genealogist and you want more videos just like this. Thanks, bye.